you.
All right, so we are on the last two chapters of Second Corinthians. I think we will finish up today because these are short chapters. Well, we start out Second Corinthians chapter 12, verse 1. No, so Paul, remember, is in the middle of defending himself there against these apostles who have come in after he left Corinth and are trying to change what he taught. Probably they're trying to encourage more observance of the Mosaic law, like the dietary laws, circumcision, etc. There's it's possible, we don't really know exactly what they were teaching, but that seems to be the most likely. And so he's defending himself. And if you remember at the end of chapter 11, he told this story. He was kind of listing all the hardships that he's undergone. So he's, and this section is called the fool's speech, because Paul is playing the fool. It was kind of like a rhetorical device. He was speaking, quote unquote, foolishly, boasting, but he was kind of turning it on its head. He was boasting about his weaknesses and about his sufferings. And, you know, the interesting thing is that he is doing this all with this rhetorical kind of flourish, you know, writing a very powerful letter when his critics in Corinth, these kind of false apostles, as he calls them, are saying that he's not a very good speaker. His speech is contemptible. And so, so anyway, he's kind of, this is who he's responding to, is critics. And so at the end of chapter 11, he listed the sufferings that he's gone through as a way of quote unquote boasting. And then he mentions kind of oddly how he was let down in a basket when he was in Damascus. And I think that was also, I think he said 14 years ago, or about the same time. So that leads him into talking about another incident. Now here, because it's something positive, something that could be perceived as positive, that he had this revelation of the Lord, he switches to the third person. So he says here, verse 1, "It is doubtless not profitable for me to boast." So he realizes he's in this tough position that on the one hand, he needs to kind of show his credentials in order to counter the critiques of the false apostles who had arrived in Corinth, but also at the same time, it was considered bad form to commend yourself. So he recognizes this. "It is doubtless not profitable for me to boast. I will come to visions and revelations of the Lord. I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago, whether in the body, I do not know, or whether out of the body, I do not know, God knows.
So he's talking about himself here. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, he's talking about himself. Such a one was caught up to the third heaven." So, and it's going to become clear in a minute that he's talking about himself. But he kind of plays it off as, I know someone, I have a friend who this happened to. So that because, you know, because this whole section is about boasting, not boasting, boasting in your weaknesses. So when he comes here to something that's positive, that the Lord revealed himself to him, he doesn't want to say it's me, because it would be like showing off, perhaps. So he says, I know a man in Christ. All right, let's see. So 14 years ago, we think that this letter was written somewhere around the year 55 AD. So 14 years ago would put it somewhere 41, 42 AD. So that's years after. So he's not referring to the call on the road to Damascus, because that would have been perhaps 10 years before that, 8-10 years before that. So he's talking about a different revelation that he had when he was caught up. Yeah.
But he says 14 years before. So this is before his conversion?
No, this is, so if Jesus died, probably Jesus was born in 4 BC. That's the best guess. And if he died at 33, it means 33 years old. Somewhere around 29 AD is when he died. And then his revelation, you know, the call on the road to Damascus is shortly after his ascension. So maybe a year or something. So you're looking at like 30 AD. And then this incident is taking place probably somewhere 40, 42 AD. So it's 10, 12 years later. And then the letter he's writing is 14 years even after that.
I see.
Father Gregory?
Yeah.
I'm lost. I don't know which chapter you're on.
chapter 12, verse 1.
Oh, you're back in Corinthians 1.
Second Corinthians, chapter 12, 1, 2,
Okay,
verse 1.
We have a question over here, Father.
Yeah,
What is the third one?
the third, okay, we're gonna get to that, yeah. So the third heaven that he's talking about, there were, in the ancient world, especially the Greeks, viewed that there were many heavens. Now, sometimes they said in the number of heavens ranged from 3, was the lowest, to 365. But
Hmm.
usually people talked about either 3 or 7 heavens. And they viewed it as like this progression going up into the sky. So the air around us that we breathe, our atmosphere right here, that they would call that, this is the first heaven. Then you had the second heaven, then you had the third heaven. It depends on which, sometimes they would talk about it as the 7th heaven or the 365th heaven. But anyway, the idea was that there was this higher space. And so for Paul, there's probably 3 heavens in his kind of conception. And the third heaven, he's identifying, we're going to see in a second, with paradise. So the common Jewish belief at the time was that paradise existed, but that it was being held kind of in reserve, in abeyance in heaven. So paradise existed in this third heaven. But when the end comes, paradise would be moved to earth. But as of now, it was located in the third heaven. So what we think is happening here is that Paul is talking about the experience of the throne room of God. The third heaven would be the highest heaven, where paradise is and where God himself dwells in his throne room. And so, if you look to the prophets like Isaiah or Jeremiah or Ezekiel, they have these visions of God in his throne room, surrounded by the angels who are constantly worshiping him. And so what I think is going on here is Paul. Now remember, Jeremiah is the key text here, because in Jeremiah, which I think is what Paul's thinking of here, Jeremiah is fighting the false prophets at that time. Throughout the Old Testament, you have this problem of the false prophets, right? And Jeremiah lays out what's the criteria for whether someone's a true prophet or a false prophet. He said a true prophet is the one who's seen God worshiped in his throne room, who's been in the presence of God. This is the mark of a true prophet. And so what I think is going on here is Paul is kind of pointing back to Jeremiah. Now remember, all this is in the context of his debate with these false apostles, right? So in Paul's mind, he sees this whole situation as parallel to Jeremiah, that Paul is dealing with false apostles just like Jeremiah dealt with false prophets, teaching something that was incorrect, that they're not sent from God, even though they're claimed to be sent from God, etc. And so I think what Paul's saying is, look, I have the mark of a true prophet because I've been in the third heaven. I've seen the throne room of God. So I think that's what he's getting to. And this is something that the Greeks would have understood. So it's something that the Jews had in their cosmology, we say, in their kind of conception of how the world was structured. But it's something the Greeks would understand as well, because the Greeks believed, coming from out of Plato, that and this is probably why he's mentioning this in or out of the body, is that for the Greeks, the body was bad, right? For following Plato, the body was a prison and the soul wanted to be liberated from the body. And so at death, the soul would be now that it's liberated from this body that was weighing it down, the soul would transport itself through the heavens up to the highest heaven, right? This was kind of the goal of life. And so what Paul's saying here would resonate with Jews, but it also would resonate with Greeks. Now, and remember, this was an issue he dealt with earlier in his correspondence at the end of 1 Corinthians in chapter 15. Remember how he has that big section on the resurrection and the body. And he really wants to emphasize, it became clear in 1 Corinthians 15 that was one of the major problems that was underlying all of these symptoms of problems in Corinth, was they didn't understand the church's teaching, the Christian teaching regarding the body. And this would have been common for Greeks. Greeks would have held this kind of bias against the body, whereas Jews would have been more pro-body. And so Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 really teaches that no, there's going to be a bodily resurrection, He has to keep hammering that, because apparently they don't believe that. because the Greeks again had this bias. So this is probably why he mentions whether, and this was something that was discussed in general, whether these revelations took place in the body or out of the body. Paul here says probably these false apostles would have made a big deal about whether it was in the body or out of the body, because they seem to be kind of philosophizing and so on. Paul seems to kind of say, doesn't matter, I don't care whether, so kind of dismissing their concerns. Doesn't matter whether it was in the body or out of the body, but such a one, I was caught up to the third heaven. So there's other literature about whether these revelations took place in the body. Like, you have Enoch, for example, who is considered to have been translated into heaven, or Elijah, who was translated into heaven bodily, and so bodily is in the throne room with God. Paul here just kind of brackets that question. He doesn't know, and it's also, he's trying to show what an overwhelming experience it was, that it's beyond words. He doesn't even know himself what happened. So he says in verse 3, and I know such a man, whether in the body or out of the body, I don't know, God knows. So he repeats himself, how he was caught up into paradise and heard inexpressible words. So his third heaven and paradise are the same thing. Heard inexpressible words, which is not lawful for a man to utter. In other words, he heard the words he heard being uttered in this kind of constant worship of God in the throne room were something that he can't repeat. He's not allowed to repeat them. And this is something that would have been familiar to the Greeks as well, because the Greeks had these mystery cults. The main, I would say, one of the primary kind of religious forces in this time were these mystery cults, which meant that they were initiated into certain mysteries, or perhaps some rites, sacraments, something like that. Like, for example, in the cult of Mithras, they would slaughter a bull, and they would basically kind of have the blood of the bull pour over the initiate. And this would be one of the rites of initiation, almost kind of like a baptism in blood from this bull. This was one of the, and then they would, in these rites, they would have secret words that they would say, certain prayers or whatever. And kind of like secret societies today, they had, or throughout history, they're not really so much today, but, they have secret handshakes and secret code phrases, or something like that. This was kind of common at that time, so they would have understood that. But these words that they would say, basically, once you were initiated into the mystery, you were sworn to sign. You were sworn to secrecy. You could never reveal.
Kind of like a Mason.
Yeah, and like HEPA supposedly has that.
Fraternity, sorority,
Yeah.
the Greek life.
Sorority, right, sororities. Fraternity, sorority.
So it's this idea that there's something mysterious. But even for the Greeks, though, this would be surprising, because in the mystery cults for the Greeks, anyone who's initiated would be privy to this information. But Paul's saying no one's privy to this information. I can't repeat it. It's that mysterious. So let's see. In Jewish text, paradise, the new Eden, was the opposite of hell, or Gehenna. And it would exist on earth in the world to come, but it was reserved in the heavens at the present time. Okay, verse 5. Of such a one I will boast, yet of myself I will not boast, except in my infirmities. So going back to the previous chapter when he listed all his hardships, that's what he's boasting in, his hardships, his weakness, his sufferings. For though I might desire to boast, I will not be a fool, for I will speak the truth. But I refrain lest anyone should think of me above what he sees me to be or hears from me. So you can tell why he's starting to give himself, in a second, he's going to give himself away, that he's really talking about himself, but he's kind of explaining here why he's speaking enigmatically, is because he's afraid lest anyone should think of me above what he sees me to be or hears from me. In other words, he wants to remain humble. He doesn't want to exalt himself by talking about these revelations. So the fathers say, interestingly, about this, If anyone talks about the things that have been revealed to him, that in itself is not foolish. But if he keeps quiet about them, he may be more wise. And then Chrysostom says, it is not so much the deeds themselves that tempt us to pride as our telling them to others. So in other words, if we have these spiritual experiences, the fathers tell us that it's often better to keep them to ourselves because there's a danger of becoming prideful if we share that, we had a word from God or some miracle in our eyes happened or something. All right, 12:7. Unless I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of the revelation. So here he gives himself away. He said, lest I should be exalted by the abundance of the revelations. A thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I be exalted above measure. Concerning this thing, I pleaded with the Lord 3 times that it might depart from me. So in other words, God has humbled him. What's he talking about, this thorn in the flesh? He talks about it in Galatians too. So probably thorn in the flesh is a reference back to the Old Testament when the Canaanites, remember the Canaanites occupied the promised land before Israel came and took it over. And they were ordered to kill all the Canaanites, to extinguish them from the land. Well, they didn't. And so the Canaanites that were left in the promised land, which we have some encounter, Jesus has an encounter with a Canaanite woman. These were kind of a constant reminder of Israel's failure. And so the Canaanites who were left in the land, in the promised land, were called in the Old Testament a thorn in Israel's side. A thorn in Israel's side, a constant reminder of their failure, a constant kind of humbling. And so Paul's probably using this expression thorn in the flesh in that sense. So what is this thorn in the flesh exactly that he was buffeted with, but which God allowed in order to keep him humble? Some people say it could be a physical ailment, and there's been all kinds of speculation about what that could be. Probably the most popular theory is based on Galatians, where Paul talks again about this thorn in the flesh. And then immediately after he talks about the thorn in the flesh in Galatians, he signs off the letter to the Galatians by saying, I write this in my own hand, because he was dictating the letter to someone. But then at the end, he took it from him. He says, I'm writing this last part in my own hand, in other words, to kind of sign it. And he says, see with what big letters I write, which is kind of an odd phrase. And so people have thought that this thorn in the flesh perhaps is some ailment with his eyes, that he couldn't see well. And then that also kind of fits with, the scales that covered his eyes when he had the experience on the road to Damascus, but nobody knows.
Okay.
Or some people say this thorn in the flesh could simply be these false apostles who are following him around, that they're the thorn in his flesh.
I don't know where it is, but doesn't he say I prayed about it and it hasn't gone away?
Galatians, yeah.
Is that
And
Galatians?
so in the same section, yeah. So here he says the same thing concerning this thing. I pleaded with the Lord 3 times. In other words, it could literally be 3 times, but 3 is also it could be plenty of times. Often I prayed that it might depart from me, but the Lord allowed it so that he would remain humble. So yeah, some people think it's some kind of eye ailment. Some people think it might be a speech impediment that he had, because they say that his speech is contemptible. These are all guesses. Or that it's more in the terms of persecutions, opposition, these false apostles. We don't know.
This is the spiritual temptation.
Yeah. So they're taking the view that it's a spiritual rather than a physical ailment, that it's a spiritual thing like persecution, something like that.
So Father, let me just ask you explained it, but you're saying that his vision or his experience occurred not on the road to Damascus, but at another point, and we're not sure exactly when. Is that correct?
Right, yeah, the experience that he relates at the beginning of 12 is not
Okay.
Damascus, because that's probably at least 10 years earlier than this would have been.
Okay.
So
I thought wanted to make a note.
what that tells us though is that, and he talks about visions and revelations, and then he says, lest I be exalted above measure by the abundance of the revelations. In Acts, we know that he has, I think, at least 3 revelations from Christ, 2 more in addition to the one that he had on the road to Damascus in chapter 9. And chapter 22, he talks about another vision that he had. So Paul, was, and then this is part of an argument about Paul in general. Some people argue, and I tend to side with them, that a lot of times in modern times, Paul has become for us a kind of proto-Presbyterian, meaning like that, Presbyterian ministers kind of stereotypically are very studious or very academic, they study the scriptures. There's a very kind of exact science of salvation. This happens and then this happens, and you take this verse, and it's very kind of respectable and academic. And sometimes we tend to make Paul into this kind of academic, and that he's got this kind of complex system of salvation that he's got all worked out. And I think that's probably a mistake for us to read back into Paul what we like, and that some people are really arguing that he was more of a mystic than we realize, because he talked about these revelations frequently, but typically in the Protestant world, they don't tend to focus on them so much. It's more like, what does he say in Romans, which is his kind of theological tract. But
I had always kind of thought that in the time that he was in Damascus, that he, in those days there, he gained so much information and illumination from God at that point. But it makes sense that they continued throughout his ministry.
Yeah, and then
Thank
here, and then here in verse 9, so he pleaded with the Lord 3 times, and what does the Lord respond in verse 9? And he said to me, this is the only saying we have of the risen Lord in Paul's letters: my grace is sufficient for you, my strength is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, most gladly, I will rather boast in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore, I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in needs, meaning necessities, kind of like we pray in the liturgy for all help from all deliverance from all necessity, meaning times of need, in persecutions and distresses for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. So again, he's continuing this kind of turning upside down of the Corinthians' sensibilities. The Corinthians are rather boasting in these false apostles, how kind of eloquent they are, how respectable they are, etc., etc. And Paul is only boasting in his infirmities and his weakness, because my grace is sufficient for you, my strength is made perfect in weakness. So Paul wants to show it's not me, but he, at the same time, he's at pains to show that he has authority, that he has power, that he has credentials, but he also wants to be careful to say it's all Christ. It's nothing to do with me. There's nothing that I've contributed to this. It's Christ working through me. Let's see. By grace, Paul's humility overcame his frailty, the fathers tell us. By this, it became clear that God's power is made perfect in persecutions and sufferings. When some infirmity or desolation attacks us, then our power is made mature if faith stands firm. The more trials we face, the more grace we are capable of receiving, Chrysostom says. So does this imply that the devil is good because he's useful? On the contrary, he's evil because he's the devil. But God, who is good and almighty, draws many good things out of the devil's malice. So sometimes God allows these persecutions, these oppositions to take place, whether it's physically or spiritually, for our good, because he can be manifest in our weakness. All right, so then he says, I have become a fool in boasting. You have compelled me. So he's kind of like in the last couple of chapters, he's going back and forth. He keeps kind of boasting or showing his credentials and then turning back from it, because again, he's trying to strike this balance between saying he himself is weak, but through him Christ is powerful. But you have compelled me, for I ought to have been commended by you. So this is kind of the key line in this section. That's what he's upset about, is that there's all this criticism of him going on in certain sections in the church in Corinth, and it's being kind of fostered or led by these false apostles who have come into town and kind of made friends with the wealthier, well-to-do Corinthians in the church. This group is running Paul down. And so Paul has to come back with something to show that he has some authority, right? But he is upset that he's the one that has to do it. He's saying, it ought to have been you who did this for me. In other words, the group, the rest of the church that's not with this group, they should have stood up for him, that's what he's saying. For in nothing was I behind the most eminent apostles, though I am nothing. So see how he's trying to strike this balance? For in nothing was I behind the most eminent apostles, though I am nothing. Truly the signs of an apostle were accomplished among you with all perseverance and signs and wonders and mighty deeds. So and he's speaking in the passive voice here, was accomplished among you, but he's saying he did it. So he's saying that he worked signs and wonders and mighty deeds, miracles he worked while he was with them. For what is it, verse 13, for what is it in which you were inferior to other churches, except that I myself was not burdensome to you? Forgive me this wrong. So he's being sarcastic. So he's saying, I'm equal with the most eminent apostles. I'm fully an apostle. I did the sign, I worked the signs and wonders of an apostle when I was with you. There's in no way am I inferior to the other apostles, except in one thing. The one thing that the one difference that exists between me and these other apostles is that I didn't take any money. So he's really kind of underlining that fact. I didn't take any money from you, but these false apostles who have come in have taken the kind of generosity of these wealthy Corinthians. And Paul's saying, I didn't do that. That's the only way in which I'm inferior to these other apostles that you crave for, is that I didn't take your money. Forgive me this wrong, he says sarcastically.
Father,
Yeah.
did you say at the very beginning that we don't really know what those false apostles were teaching? I mean,
Yeah,
what
we can only kind of, there's a lot of scholars try to reconstruct based on the letters and try to read in between the lines what they must have been teaching. And of course there's disagreement. Some say that they were teaching more kind of, they say that this group was Gnostics, so more influenced by the Greeks, more influenced by this idea that there was a secret knowledge that you needed to have in order to be initiated into the mysteries, that there were some Christians who were more enlightened than others because they had the secret knowledge. And the backing for this point of view is that, earlier in 1 Corinthians, Paul's talking about you have knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge, gnosis, Gnostic, and wisdom, knowledge. So there's some speculation that maybe this group was kind of Gnostic, but I think more of the evidence points to them being pro Mosaic law, and perhaps there was some weird mixture of the two. Who knows? It's all kind of educated guesswork. All right, let's see. Forgive me this wrong. All right, verse 14. Now for the third time, I am ready to come to you. All right, so remember the first time he came to them was related to us in Acts, and I think Acts chapter 18, after he goes through northern Greece, he goes down to Athens, he preaches on Mars Hill, then he goes to Corinth, and there he spends anywhere between 18 months and 3 years living in Corinth. So one of the longest periods he ever stayed anywhere. And then we know from the letters that he had this painful visit in which he came and he kind of, he had to read them the riot act. He had to excommunicate some people. And now part of the reason for this letter is to reconcile. So now with this letter, he's saying, now I'm coming a third time. So this last time, the second time was not pleasant. Now for the third time, I'm ready to come to you, and I will not be burdensome to you. For I do not seek yours, but you. So I do not seek yours, your stuff. I don't seek your stuff, your things, your money. but I seek you. For the children ought not to lay up for the parents, but the parents for the children. So, and again, he's saying that he is their father. So he says it's not right for children to give money to the parents, to the father. The father should provide for the children. So he's saying this is another reason why I won't take any money from you. But it's interesting though, too, that this group that seems to be the wealthy group of Corinthians and the group that's making the most problems, the wealthy and making the most problems in the church, Paul really seems to, he doesn't want to be beholden to them, it seems like, you know. And so maybe that's a big reason why he doesn't want to take any money, because somehow that they would think that they kind of own him in some way. And I will very gladly spend and be spent for your souls. Though the more abundantly I love you, the less I am loved. Which is sad. So Paul is saying he's trying to show them that he loves them, that he's their father, he doesn't want anything from them. And this is probably the underlying issue, is we get the sense that these false apostles have come in. And one of the critiques of Paul, not only is, he doesn't look the part, his speech is contemptible, but furthermore, let me see, what was I saying? The third time the son, parents for the children. Oh, but furthermore, this collection that he's taking up. So he's saying, I'm not going to take any money from you to support me. But the false apostles are pointing out, yeah, but look, he is still asking for money. He's asking for this collection money. Who knows what he's going to do with it? They're kind of implying that he really is taking money, but he's doing it through this collection. Yeah, right. And so Paul seems particularly sensitive about this issue of money being leveled against him.
Father, I don't understand in verse 15, where he says, well, I'm reading from a King James version, though the more abundantly I love you, the less I be loved. Is that I don't get it.
Though the more abundant, so he's saying, for the children ought not to lay up for the parents, but the parents for the children. In other words, I should be providing for you. You should not be providing for me. And he's saying, and I will very gladly spend and be spent for your souls. In other words, and I will gladly, that's my job as the parent, as the father, and I will gladly spend, and he's talking kind of metaphorically, probably not about money, but spend his effort, his labors, and be spent, in other words, exhaust himself for your souls, for their upbuilding, for their edification. Though he says, unfortunately, the fact is, the more I try to love you, the less love I'm getting in return.
I see. Okay.
So he's upset with them because, like he just said, he's upset with them that at least, maybe he can understand these well-to-do Corinthians who have sided with the false apostles, but he's wondering, hey, the rest of you, why are you letting these guys push you around? Why aren't you sticking up for me? Why are you just sitting silently and going along with whatever the wealthy tell you to do? All right. 16. But be that as it may, I did not burden you. Nevertheless, being crafty, I caught you by cunning. So this is where he's talking about the collection. And again, he's being sarcastic. So I didn't burden you. I didn't take any salary from you, but being crafty, I caught you by cunning. In other words, I planned this whole collection thing just to get money in this kind of secret way instead of taking it from you directly. It's kind of pointing out that it sounds kind of absurd that he would do that. So then he says in 17, did I take advantage of you by any of those whom I sent to you? So again, he's kind of harping on this issue that it's almost certain that they're accusing him of some malfeasance with this collection money, or implying, and he's saying, first of all, it's absurd. Why would I not take money from you and then come up with this devious plan to get money in another way? And then look at my actions. If I was really this kind of con man, wouldn't it manifest itself in other ways? Did I take advantage of you by any of those whom I sent to you? I urged Titus and sent our brother with him, meaning probably Luke, Did Titus take advantage of you? Did we not walk in the same spirit? Did we not walk in the same steps? So he's saying, okay, if you don't trust me, look at Titus. You like Titus, you trust Titus. Titus and I are on the same team. So if you trust him, you should trust me. All right, 12:19. Again, do you think that we excuse ourselves to you? We speak before God in Christ, but we do all things, beloved, for your edification, your building up. For I fear lest when I come, I shall not find you such as I wish, and I shall be found by you such as you do not wish. So in other words, his second visit, he was very kind of powerful. And he's saying, because of what he found when he got there, that they weren't kind of self-policing and taking care to make sure that people, one man was living with was sleeping with his stepmother, and they were all proud of it. And Paul comes and he's like, what the heck is going on here? So he has to set things right. And he says, he's worried, he's nervous that he's going to visit a third time and that things are still going to be messed up. And that he's going to have to be tough with them again. He doesn't want that. And he knows they don't want it. Lest there be contentions, jealousies, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambitions, backbitings, whisperings, conceits, tumults. Lest when I come again, my God will humble me among you, and I shall mourn for many who have sinned before and have not repented of the uncleanness, fornication, and lewdness which they have practiced. So, what does he mean? My God will humble me among you. I don't know exactly what he means here, but he's saying that he will have to manifest this power and make them upset, and upset himself too by having to do this. And again, the issue seems uncleanness, fornication, and lewdness. Probably he's alluding to one of the big problems in Corinth is that they're still going to the pagan temples. So this is what's leading to the uncleanness. It's what's leading to the fornication, because they had sexual acts, and some of the pagan worship, temple worship, lewdness, and for a Jew. Say that again?
Eating the meat sacrificed to idols.
Yes, yeah.
That's not sexual though, is it?
No, it's
No,
not
but
sexual.
those are the two big things: the eating meat and the sexual uncleanness was what he really covered in 1 Corinthians. And so you can see it coming up again here. That's probably, that problem hasn't gone away, probably. Oh, okay. Yeah. So what he means here by when I come again, my God will humble me among you. So he's, in other words, that their poor spiritual state will humiliate Paul. That when he comes and finds them still going to pagan temples and engaging in all this lewd practice, that he's going to be humbled or humiliated before God. That this is what the people I taught are doing. All right, then he goes into 13:1. This will be, so he repeats, this will be the third time I'm coming to you. By the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, every word shall be established. So this is kind of a threat. So he's quoting from the law, he's quoting from the Torah, that said, and he's framing it in terms of a court case, right? So the law said that court cases would be determined on whether or not 2 or 3 witnesses agree on what happened. If 2 or 3 witnesses agree on what happened, then they can convict. So Paul's bringing out this kind of court language and saying, I've got a case against you guys. By the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, every word shall be established. I think what he's saying is he's talking about the third time he's coming as being a third witness. So it's a bit of a metaphor. He's not talking about 3 different witnesses, but he's saying, I will have been with you 3 times. And if I keep saying the same thing the third time, then it's an established fact according to the law. Verse 2. But if the third time he comes, things are different and the facts are different, then they can't establish the case. There's no case against them then. So Paul's kind of warning them. If I catch you a third time, it's going to be trouble for you. All right, verse 2. I have told you before and foretell as if I were present the second time, and now being absent, I write to those who have sinned before, and to all the rest, that if I come again, I will not spare. Since you seek a proof of Christ speaking in me, who is not weak toward you, but mighty in you. So you're looking for signs and wonders. Well, watch out. Christ may speak powerfully through me if things are as I fear they're going to be when I come back. Verse 4, for though he was crucified in weakness, yet he lives by the power of God. For we also are weak in him, but we shall live with him by the power of God toward you. All right. So, Paul's rebuked them so many times now. And so many people have heard his threats that if he comes a third time and nothing has changed, he'll be forced to carry out his threats, which he doesn't want to do. Christ was crucified in weakness, but this weakness was not his own, but rather something that he assumed on our behalf. All right, 13:5. Examine yourselves as to whether you are in the faith or whether you are being faithful. Test yourselves. Do you not know yourselves that Jesus Christ is in you? Unless indeed you are disqualified. But I trust that you will know that we are not disqualified. So this language of disqualifying. So back in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, Paul uses the same language, and he's using this language from the games because Corinth would have been especially familiar. There were games similar to the Olympic Games that happened in Corinth on a regular basis. So, and in general, people would have known how Olympic Games work, but in Corinth especially, they would have known. So in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, remember, he says, do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may obtain it. And everyone who competes for the prize is temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a perishable crown, but we for an imperishable crown. Therefore I run thus, not with uncertainty. Thus I fight, not as one who beats the air, but I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I preach to others, I myself should become disqualified. So what does he mean by disqualified? He means not playing by the rules. He's using this athletic imagery of if you don't follow the rules, you're disqualified from the match. You can't win the prize. And Paul's trying to win the prize. So he's saying, unless indeed you are disqualified. So test yourself, examine yourself whether you are in the faith, whether you're being faithful. And if you're not, that means you disqualified yourself from the race. But I trust that you will know that we are not disqualified. We're still in the game. We're still in the race. So Corinthian culture, Greek culture in general, evaluated speakers who came in. They would. We had the oratorical festival yesterday. The judges are grading the kids on their speeches. The Corinthians and the Greeks kind of did something similar. They're constantly, oh, he was good. I don't know if he was good. They were rating the speeches all the time. And Paul kind of turns the tables and says, examine yourselves. Don't examine other people. Examine yourselves. Are you being faithful to what you are taught? I am. 13:7. Now I pray to God that you do no evil, not that we should appear approved. All right, so in other words, he's praying that they do no evil and that they do what's honorable. Not that, again, remember he was just saying that he's afraid he's gonna be humiliated before God by their poor behavior. And he's saying I pray you don't do these things, not so that we can appear like we're great teachers because you're following us, but that you should do what is honorable, though we may seem disqualified. For we can do nothing against the truth, but for the truth. For we are glad when we are weak and you are strong. And this also we pray, that you may be made complete. All right, and so the word complete is perfect, like Jesus calls us. So here, he's kind of recalling the words of Jesus, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. So this we also pray, that you be perfect. That's the goal of being a Christian, to be perfect. 10, therefore I write these things being absent, lest being present, I should use sharpness, and according to the authority which the Lord has given me, for edification, and not for destruction. So in other words, they criticize, part of the criticism of Paul is that he writes these powerful letters that are full of threats and, it makes the people scared, but he himself in person is nothing to be worried about. So he's saying, it would be better, I'm writing these things in this letter so that I don't have to do it in person. I don't have to be unpleasant and personal. See you guys. All right, we're just finishing the last couple lines here.
We're going to do our duty, Father.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. All right, so then it says 13 and 11, the farewell. Finally, brethren, farewell. Become complete. In other words, become perfect. Be of good comfort. Be of one mind. Live in peace. And the God of love and peace will be with you. Greet one another with a holy kiss. So he's talking about probably this holy kiss is the kiss of peace. Did you guys ever do that in this church?
We used to, and I missed that. I wish we instill that.
Yeah, there's been a debate over the years in the archdiocese back and forth whether we should allow it. Currently, the archdiocese discourages it, doesn't want us to do it. And then with COVID, oh, forget it. They didn't want us to do it. But you still, at least you still see the remnant of it with the clergy. That point in the liturgy where the clergy go around the table. And then they greet each other by saying Christ is in our midst, he is, never shall be. So all the clergy greet each other with a holy kiss. It was at that point that while the clergy were doing that, the people would also do it, would greet one another with a holy kiss. I remember growing up Episcopalian, we would do that at a certain point in the.
Well, the Catholics, all they do, they turn around when I go to church, they say peace. You look at somebody,
Yeah.
you say peace. You don't have to embrace. Or,
Yeah,
it's not. It's nice.
Yeah.
I think it would be a good thing. We don't have to embrace and kiss each other. Just acknowledge.
the debate is that some people say that then it turns into coffee hour.
It does not. No.
That's the debate, the people say, oh, people start chatting and it's hard to get them to quiet down again, because it is a point in the service where we're getting to the kind of most holy part of the service.
Absolutely. There's no
People were
They
reasonable.
just look at each other, peace, and go on with them.
So that's what he's talking about here. And it's interesting that the pagan critics, we know from like the first couple centuries of Christianity, like Celsus was a pagan writer who wrote against Christianity. And there was all these rumors about Christians. First, they said, one of the things they said was that they take babies and dip them in flour and eat them. That's what they do. Because the language we talk about eating the body and blood, and that God was a baby, that God was born, was incarnate as a child. So probably somehow that term, how slander starts. It starts with some seed of truth. And so they said, the Christians flour babies and eat them, and that they perform these orgies. And that when we get together, we have orgies. Where did they get that from? Well, first, because they said we say it's an agape service, which means love. And then the Christians talked apparently in the 1st century, 2nd century about giving this holy kissing each other during the service. So you can see how this kind of language, a pagan hears it, and he's predisposed to want to think the worst about Christianity to begin with. Then he hears that they're eating bodies and that there's a baby God and they're eating their God and they're kissing each other. So they turn it into this big slander of they're having orgies and eating babies. And that's what Christians are doing. So we know that they were doing this in the 1st century. So that's probably what he's talking about. When you're in the service, greet each other with a holy kiss. All the saints greet you. And then the final line, verse 14, the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the communion of the Holy Spirit be with you all. That's a line that we say in the liturgy, so that's an apostolic blessing from Paul to the people. And so that got taken from the scriptures and put into the liturgy as a way of conveying another apostolic blessing through the priest.
And Father, I think that every time it's said after the creed on Sundays, I think it's so reinforcing of the Trinity and is the closest thing in my mind, to an explanation of the Holy Trinity. It's just so beautiful. You really take it apart and investigate each phrase. I think it's so affirming.
Yeah, amen. So, just in the last couple of minutes, to provide kind of an end to this story, kind of. So we've been following, we read Acts, then we read 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians. So we've spent a long time now dealing with Corinth, right? And the problems in Corinth, and getting a picture of what was going on in Corinth, that there were these wealthy Christians who were part of a problem in Corinth. They were causing divisions. Then these false apostles come in and start trying to sway the people, etc. But one point I'd like to make is that obviously from the two letters we just read, Corinth, the Corinthian church was not a perfect church. They had problems, big problems. And so we can kind of joke and say that that's how we know that we're in the apostolic church, because our churches have problems too, right? That we're fully in line with the apostolic church in that way. That the church is perfect, but the people in the church aren't perfect and aren't going to be perfect. The second point I wanted to make was that there's an end after this. What do I mean? So we don't really know now what happened. We don't know. We don't have any account of Paul going back the third time. Was it a pleasant visit? Was it not? The next information we have from Corinth is around the year 90. So we're talking about 35 years after this letter is written. What happens around the year 90? We have a letter called First Clement. It was written by Clement of Rome, a saint of our church, who was the Bishop of Rome at that time in approximately 90 AD. And what happened apparently, it's a very interesting letter to read. In the early church, in the first centuries, First Clement was often included in what would become the New Testament. The epistle of Barnabas and First Clement, a lot of times there's two or three, the Shepherd of Hermas, the epistle of Diognetus. Those four, I would say, were oftentimes included in the New Testament. And they were only, First Clement was not included finally, only because it wasn't written by a direct apostle, but by a successor to the apostles. But what does he say in First Clement? So what happened apparently was a delegation from Corinth, sometime around the year 90, went to Rome, which would have been the closest of the major sees, the major dioceses, let's say. It would have been the closest of the major ones. The other ones would have been in Jerusalem, Antioch, Alexandria, which from Corinth would have been quite far away. The closest geographically would have been Rome. So they apparently a group goes from Corinth to Rome to ask for kind of arbitration, to appeal to Rome for help, because what had happened, according to First Clement, there was a group in Corinth who kicked out all the clergy. So there was a group of lay people in Corinth who dismissed all the clergy without any permission from anybody, without any permission from the bishop or anybody. And they just decided, you guys are gone, we're going to have our own clergy that we decide. And the First Clement, he's like, what on earth is going on over there? He's beside himself. And the whole letter is him explaining why the church does not allow them to do that. That is completely unacceptable. He uses the metaphor, a beautiful metaphor of the church as kind of, he compares it to the Roman army, that there's this order in the church, etc., and that the Corinthians are way out of line, and that they must invite back the clergy that they dismissed. We don't know after that what happened, whether they actually followed it or not, but that's kind of a peek of what happened in 90. So this 2 Corinthians is 55 AD. Paul's still having problems with them. Fast forward 35 years, not much has changed apparently. They're still causing problems in Corinth. So that's kind of interesting. I encourage you to read First Clement. If it's a really beautiful letter, if you haven't read it.
Where is it? Where can we find it?
There's a great website that I recommend to everyone. It's called earlychristianwritings.org. Earlychristianwritings.org, and it's got all all of these early Christian documents from the 1st century, the 2nd century, the 3rd century. It's got them in multiple translations. You know, sometimes there's like an older 1800s translation and then a newer translation. So you can find it, and it's all free on that website. There's some interesting stuff. They also, you got to be a little bit careful because they include a bunch of heretical stuff too, like the Gospels that were heretical, some epistles and acts that were heretical. They include this in this website for the sake of information, but you know, you got to be discerning to know what you're reading, what the church believes. So there are some of these writings that were not included in the New Testament that the church accepts as even inspired to some degree. They just weren't suitable to be included in the New Testament because the criteria was it had to be written by an apostle and that it had to do with the life of Jesus Christ. But there are some documents that, even though they don't meet that criteria, are still considered inspired and profitable for reading. All right, so that's it. I know. What do you guys think about what should the next book be that we study? Do we want to go back to a gospel?
Can we do Romans?
Romans.
I think it would be interesting.
Yeah, you like the epistles? Romans would be good.
Yeah, Romans or Hebrews? Romans or Hebrews, Father?
Okay. I thought someone would say Revelation.
Oh, well, I'm
I'd
studying Revelation now. Revelation would be great.
love to do Revelation.
That's so deep.
I would love to do
Yeah.
Revelation.
Revelation is so.
All right, so we got to vote Romans, Hebrews, maybe Revelation. All right,
Revelations.
we'll see. We'll see. Maybe we'll take a little break until after Pascha, because for me it's going to be really busy the next couple weeks.
I think that's a good idea.
So maybe we'll resume after Pascha with a new book. Maybe one of those three.
That sounds like a good idea.
Sounds good, Father. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Guys.
Thanks,
God
honey.
bless. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Kalimera. Hi, Najwa. I didn't even know you were on. I can't hear you at all. I don't know why not.
I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Well, I was trying to get ready. Actually, wash my hair and everything while I'm listening. Because I have to be at the doctor's, and so I have an appointment. So I have to listen while getting ready. And so that's why I didn't participate
I
much.
see.
But I've got company too, my brother and his wife, and my brother's not feeling too good. So I'm trying to get myself together and see how we can help them.
But you were listening at the same time.
I was listening, even when I was washing my hair, I had it that close to me where I was listening.
Yeah.
You know, I just sometimes you have to do multiple things when you have an appointment coming up and get ready, and you don't want to miss the lesson.
Oprah calls that multitasking.
Multitasking all the time, too much, I think. I think I need to slow down, because lately my heart is giving out on me. I don't know what's going on with that.
So what's giving out on you?
My heart is just have been having issues there.
Really? Oh. I don't
You
like
know,
that.
I need to be careful. And I'm gonna see my doctor.
You're going to a cardiologist?
No, today I'm going to a different doctor, but I've left a message for my cardiologist to call me because I want to see if I can see him.
Yes.
You know, just did not feel well the last few days, maybe too much stress or something.
Too bad.
Yeah, so
Who's
but
your cardiologist, Najwa? Who do you?
he is Dr. Merritt Collum. He is with the Southview Medical Group.
Okay.
So I missed my last appointment, so I want to make sure that I get to see him. I'm feeling it better than yesterday, but for the last 3 days, my left side, my back and the front under my breast was hurting, and I had nausea. So that bothered me.
Sure. Oh.
But anyway, we hope that it's going to be okay.
Oh,
It could be just too much going on. You know, stress sometimes does that. But it's not good to neglect it. Everybody, said you need to go. You need to go see your doctor.
Right. That's right.
So hopefully it will be all right. Sometimes we can't help the stress. It's just too many things that we're trying to do at the same time. But anyway, well, how are you doing? Everything okay?
Well, it could be better. We're having, you know that about 2 weeks ago, Bob had that procedure I told you about where they inserted a watchman into his heart.
Yes.
That went very well. That went very well. So I would say overall, his health is improving.
Good. That's a good sign. That's a
Yeah,
good.
very good. Yeah, very good. Yeah.
Well, there's always a little something going on. As far as health at our age.
Oh, for sure. You just go from, we solve one problem and go on to the next one occurs the next day.
Yeah, I know it. And I'm trying to see if I could teach myself to slow down. Because I realize I cannot do the things I used to do.
Boy, that's the truth.
I think I have to let go. My doorbell is ringing, believe it or not.
Ah,
Let me
Okay.
let you go.
I'm gonna
Okay.
let you go. Okay, of course.
All right, thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye. God be with you.
Thank you. Thank you, dear.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.